Welcome to the All Sorts podcast,
Right.
where we kind of cast our nets wide and deep into the ocean of big ideas and bring back those like precious pearls of wisdom and insight to you, our listeners.
And if you're ready to unlock those secret compartments of your own mind,
Yeah.
to really feel the fire of understanding, then you've definitely come to the right place, you know? So come join our ever-growing community of curious minds, like share and subscribe to the All Sorts podcast on YouTube.
Yeah. And help us, continue to make these deep dives into all sorts of fascinating topics.
Right. And don't forget, you can always explore the vast library of past deep dives we've done. Each one is like its own portal to a new realm of knowledge,
Right.
waiting to be discovered.
Mm-hmm.
And for those ongoing currents of, conversation and discovery, connect with us, the All Sorts podcast on
Instagram and Threads.
Yeah, let's keep the exploration going, together.
So today we're setting a course for one of those truly like foundational, like cornerstones of Western philosophy, the really like just immense and influential world of Plato.
Oh, for sure.
And specifically, we're going to kind of dive deep into his Republic,
Okay.
focusing in on books 2 and 3, and we'll also be pulling out some really important perspectives from excerpts of his dialogues, the Timaeus and the Critias.
So think of this, our listener, as your own personal expedition into Plato's most enduring ideas.
I like that.
Our mission is to extract like the vital essence of his thinking on these timeless questions that continue to, really shape how we understand the world and ourselves. Questions like, what is justice really? What principles, should be the bedrock of an ideal society? What is the inner architecture of the human soul? And even what are Plato's grand visions of the cosmos itself?
Right, like the really big question.
The biggest.
Yeah, and I think, we've got to acknowledge that diving into Plato can sometimes feel like you're navigating a labyrinth, but we're here to be your guide.
Your Ariadne's thread,
Yeah.
guiding you through the most illuminating and captivating pathways.
Exactly.
Of thought.
So let's just plunge right in to the heart of the Republic, starting with books 2 and 3. And almost immediately in book 2, we encounter this really provocative and kind of unsettling challenge to the very bedrock of justice.
Yeah.
Thrasymachus, who's this rather forceful character.
Yeah.
He strides onto the scene and he declares in no uncertain terms, and I'm paraphrasing here the punchiness of it, but he basically says that might makes right.
Oh, okay.
And that what we call justice is nothing more than just the interest of the stronger.
Right. It's a pretty cynical and you might say even a timelessly relevant perspective on power, wouldn't you?
Absolutely. It's something that unfortunately we continue to see play out.
To this day.
Yeah, throughout history and in current events as well.
For sure. And what I find so fascinating is that Socrates initially finds himself really struggling to effectively counter this claim.
Yeah, he's really put on the spot.
He is.
Yeah.
And it kind of exposes this persistent question, does justice have any inherent value, or is it just a tool used by the powerful?
Right. Or is it just a kind of convenient fiction that allows those in power to maintain their position?
Exactly.
And it's actually Socrates' own companions, Glaucon and Atlantis, who push him to really dig deeper.
Okay.
They're not convinced by Thrasymachus' argument, but they want Socrates to demonstrate the inherent worth of justice. Not just kind of refute the opposite, but really show positively why justice is valuable in itself.
So do they ask him to kind of prove it?
They do. They give him this really interesting thought experiment.
Okay.
They say, imagine someone who appears to be just, but is secretly unjust.
Okay.
And then another person who appears unjust, but is secretly just.
Okay.
And they want Socrates to argue why the truly just life is preferable, regardless of reputation or reward.
Right. So even if you don't get any external benefits from being just,
Yeah.
it's still the better way to live.
Yeah.
That's a powerful thought experiment.
It is.
I mean, it really gets to the heart of the matter.
Yeah. And their challenge becomes the catalyst for Socrates to make this brilliant methodological move.
Okay.
So instead of trying to define justice directly within the individual soul, which he finds difficult, he proposes to examine it on a larger scale.
Okay.
Within the structure of an ideal state.
Interesting.
He uses this analogy that justice is like letters. Large letters are easier to read than small ones.
Ah, I see.
So he's saying by looking at justice in the context of a whole society, we might be able to see its features more clearly.
Okay, so he's scaling up to get a better view.
Exactly.
So how does he start building this ideal state? What are the foundational blocks?
Well, one of the first things he does is lay down this principle of the division of labor.
Okay.
He suggests that the ideal state would be organized into three distinct classes.
Okay, so what are these three groups and what are their roles?
All right, so first you have the rulers, or the councilors.
Okay.
And these are the individuals who are distinguished by their wisdom and their understanding.
Right, so like the wisest people in the society.
Exactly. And they're the ones who are best suited to guide the state with reason.
Makes sense.
Then you have the second class, which are the guardians or the warriors.
Okay, the protectors.
Exactly. They're responsible for defending the state, maintaining order within, and protecting it from external threats.
So they're the brave ones.
Yes. And then the third class are the producers or the craftsmen.
Okay, so like the builders, the farmers, the people who make things.
Precisely. They're the ones who have the necessary skills to provide all the goods and services that the society needs to function.
So it sounds like a very structured society.
It is, and it's not just a random assortment of jobs. There's a very specific principle guiding this organization.
Okay, what is that?
Socrates calls it the principle of one man, one use.
One man, one use.
Yeah. And the idea is that individuals have different natural aptitude, different talents.
Yeah.
And that the state will be most efficient and most just when each person is focused on the role that they're naturally best suited for.
Right. So finding what you're good at and doing that for the benefit of everyone.
Exactly. Think of it like a really specialized orchestra.
Okay.
Each instrument, played by a skilled musician, contributes to the overall harmony.
I love that analogy. Yeah. Each person playing their part to create something beautiful and greater than themselves.
Right. And so this is where things get even more interesting, because as this ideal state takes shape, Plato starts connecting specific virtues not only to each of these classes within the state, but to corresponding aspects within the individual soul.
Oh, wow. So there's a connection between like the macro level of society and the micro level of the individual person.
Exactly. This is where the connection between the societal and the personal becomes really profound.
I see it. So lay it on me. What are these virtues and how do they map onto the different parts of the state and the soul?
Okay, so first we have wisdom, which is the guiding virtue of the rulers in the state.
Okay.
And this corresponds to reason in the individual soul.
So wisdom for the rulers, reason for the individual.
Right. And reason is that part of us that thinks, understands, makes rational judgments.
Okay. And that makes sense. The rulers need wisdom to make decisions for the state, and we need reason to guide our own lives.
Exactly. Then you have courage, which is the defining virtue of the guardians.
Makes sense. They need courage to defend the state.
Right. And this aligns with what he calls spirit or passion in the soul.
Okay. So courage in the guardians, spirit or passion in the individual.
Yes. And spirit or passion is that kind of energetic force within us.
Okay.
It can be both noble and resolute.
Right.
And it's the part that allows us to hold fast to our rational convictions, even in the face of pleasure or pain or fear.
I like that it's that inner strength that helps us stay true to our values.
Exactly. And what about the producers or the craftsmen?
Yeah, what virtue do they embody?
Well, the virtue associated with the producer class, and actually with the harmonious functioning of both the whole state and the individual, is temperance.
Temperance. So what does that mean exactly?
Well, temperance is not about strict self-denial.
Okay.
It's more about balance and moderation. It's the agreement between the ruling and the subject principles.
Yeah.
So in the state, this means that both the rulers and the ruled accept their respective roles.
Right. Everyone knows their place and respects the other.
Exactly. And in the individual, it means that there's this inner harmony where reason and spirit are guiding the appetites and the desires.
Okay. So preventing them from becoming excessive.
Right. So temperance is really about making sure that no single part of the state or the soul overpowers the others.
I see. It's like that Goldilocks principle. Not too much, not too little, but just...
Exactly. It's about finding that balance.
That makes a lot of sense. And so we have wisdom, courage, and temperance, each linked to a specific part of the state and the soul.
Right.
But where does justice itself fit into all of this?
Yeah, it seems like it's kind of the underlying principle that makes all of this work.
Like the glue that holds everything together.
Precisely justice, according to Plato, is that overarching principle that ensures that each class in the state and each part of the soul performs its own proper function and doesn't interfere with the others.
Okay, so justice is this harmonious arrangement and interaction of all the parts.
Yes. He even describes it really vividly as the binding force, the health of the soul that holds together these three chords of our being.
That's beautiful imagery. So if justice is this harmonious order, then I imagine injustice must be the opposite, like some kind of breakdown.
Exactly. Injustice is like this insubordination, this rebellion of the inferior elements within the soul or the lower classes within the state.
Okay, so it's like when things get out of whack.
Right. It happens when reason or the ruling class fails to maintain its guidance, or when different parts try to assume roles that aren't rightfully theirs.
So it's like an internal or societal power struggle.
Yes. And Plato draws this powerful analogy. He compares injustice in the soul to disease in the body.
Oh, that's a strong comparison.
Yeah, he suggests that both our good and bad actions cultivate corresponding habits within us.
Like creating a healthy or unhealthy spiritual environment.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's shift gears a bit and talk about Plato's thoughts on education.
Okay.
In books 2 and 3, what does he envision as the core elements of education for this ideal state?
Well, Plato puts a huge emphasis on shaping young people from the earliest years through two primary avenues.
Okay.
What he calls music and literature on the one hand,
Okay.
and gymnastic on the other.
Interesting. So what does he mean by music and literature?
Well, for Plato, music doesn't just mean melodies and rhythms. It encompasses stories, poetry, and all forms of artistic and cultural expression.
Ah, so it's more about like the arts and humanities in general.
Right. And he sees these as really powerful tools for instilling values, shaping character, and cultivating a love for beauty and goodness.
Okay, that makes sense. And what about gymnastic? That seems pretty straightforward physical training.
Right. Gymnastic is focused on training the body, developing strength, endurance, and discipline.
Okay, and why is that so important for him?
Well, Plato sees this deep connection between a well-trained body and a well-ordered soul.
Interesting.
He believes that a strong and capable body can better support a courageous and steadfast spirit.
So it's about cultivating both physical and mental strength.
Exactly.
And then we come to this seemingly paradoxical idea that Plato proposes that children should be taught the false before the true.
Right.
What in the world does he mean by that?
It does sound strange, but what Plato's getting at is that it's okay to use myths and stories, even if they're not literally true, to convey fundamental moral and religious principles to young children.
Oh, so it's like using stories as a way to teach kids about right and wrong.
Exactly. The aim isn't to deceive them, but to introduce them to these core concepts in a way that their young minds can grasp.
So it's kind of like using allegories or fables to teach moral lessons. And that actually leads into Plato's critique of traditional Greek mythology, doesn't it? He seems pretty concerned about some of the stories being told about the gods and heroes.
Yeah, he was deeply concerned that many of those traditional myths depicted the gods as flawed beings prone to lying, deception, and all sorts of bad behavior.
Right, and he worried that that would send the wrong message to young people.
Exactly. So he advocates for a careful kind of curation of these narratives, making sure that the gods are portrayed as truthful and good, serving as like moral exemplars.
So he wants to present a more pure and consistent image of the divine.
Right.
Yeah.
And he lays down two fundamental principles that he thinks should be the bedrock of religious teaching.
Okay, let's hear them.
First, God is true.
Okay.
And second, God is good.
Right, so any stories that contradict these principles should be out.
Exactly.
That makes sense. And it's not just limited to religious stories, right?
Yeah.
This kind of censorship or selection also extends to poetry and other forms of art.
It does create... Plato argues that poetry that mainly aims to excite strong emotions, particularly like excessive grief or laughter, should be excluded.
Interesting. So he's worried that those kinds of emotions can be disruptive?
Exactly. He thinks they can undermine the rule of reason and disrupt the balance within the soul and the state.
I see. So it's all about promoting rationality and moderation.
Yes. He emphasizes that law and reason should be the guiding forces in the ideal society, not pleasure and pain.
So it's all about keeping those base instincts in check.
Right. And he also emphasizes the importance of gymnastic in this whole educational framework.
Okay, yeah, we talked about that before, but remind me again, how does physical training contribute to the development of the ideal citizen?
Well, gymnastic is crucial for training the body, fostering strength, endurance, and discipline.
Right.
And Plato sees a deep connection between a well-trained body and a courageous and resilient soul.
So it's not just about physical strength, but also about cultivating those inner qualities. A very holistic approach.
It is.
So to sum up, Plato envisions this really comprehensive system of education aimed at shaping not just the intellect, but the character of the citizens.
Precisely. It's about producing well-rounded individuals who can contribute to a just and harmonious society.
Awesome. So let's shift our focus a bit now and explore the excerpts from Plato's Timaeus and Critias.
Okay.
Timaeus takes us into this realm of grand cosmological speculation, right? It delves into the very origins and structure of the universe.
It does.
It's a fascinating read.
Yeah, and in Timaeus, Plato, speaking through the character of Timaeus,
Okay.
who is this philosopher and statesman from the city of Locris, presents this intricate account of how the universe came to be and the principles that govern it.
Cool. And right from the start, Timaeus makes this key distinction that echoes some of the core ideas we saw in the Republic, this idea of separating different realms of being and different ways of knowing.
Right. He draws this crucial line between what he calls what always is and never becomes,
Okay.
and what becomes and never is.
What always is and never becomes versus what becomes and never is.
Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting. So what do those two categories represent?
Well, he associates what always is and never becomes with the realm of eternal, unchanging truths
Okay.
and perfect forms.
Right.
And he connects that with understanding or reason.
So that's the realm of like pure intellect and true knowledge.
Exactly. And then what becomes and never is, he links with the changing physical world that we perceive with our senses.
Okay, so the world of appearances and constant change.
Right. And he connects that with opinion and sense perception.
So two very different ways of understanding reality.
Exactly.
And although he doesn't explicitly use the word forms at this point in the Timaeus, it's pretty clear that's what he's talking about, right?
Oh, absolutely. What always is refers to Plato's theory of forms, those perfect, eternal archetypes that underlie the imperfect world of our senses.
Right, so like those perfect blueprints of justice, beauty, truth.
Exactly.
And those exist independently of the physical world.
Right.
And then becomes is the physical universe itself, always in motion, always changing. So according to Timaeus, this realm of what is those eternal forms, they serve as the model for the creation of the universe.
He introduces this figure of the craftsman or the creator
Okay.
who designs and builds the cosmos based on this perfect blueprint.
So this creator is like a divine architect.
Yes, and he's driven by this fundamental goodness
Okay.
and this desire to bring order, beauty, and perfection into being.
So this is a benevolent creator who wants the best for the universe.
Exactly.
But the universe wasn't always this ordered and beautiful place, it sounds like.
Timaeus describes the initial state of the visible realm as one of disorder and chaos. And so the creator's task is to bring order out of this primordial chaos.
A big job.
It is. And in this grand act of creation, the creator also brings forth what Plato calls the world soul.
Okay, the world soul.
Yes.
That sounds interesting.
It is. He describes it as being placed at the very center of the universe. And it extends outward to kind of pervade and envelop the entire cosmos.
Wow, so it's like the animating principle of the universe.
Right. It's described as being composed of the same, the other, and essence.
Okay.
And its main function is to discern sameness and difference.
Interesting.
And this capacity to perceive relationships and distinctions is what makes knowledge and opinion possible.
So the world soul is like the source of consciousness and intelligence in the universe?
In a way, yes.
Wild.
And it's interesting because Plato also introduces the concept of necessity alongside this divine mind.
Okay, so like there are certain constraints or limitations that the creator has to work within.
Exactly. He says that creation is this kind of mixed endeavor involving both mind and necessity. And mind, in its wisdom, persuades necessity to yield to the best possible outcome.
So it's like a collaboration between intelligence and the inherent nature of things.
Right. It's not that the creator can just do whatever he wants. He has
Yeah.
to work within certain pre-existing conditions.
That makes sense. And what about those classical elements, fire, water, air, earth? Does Plato see them as like the fundamental building blocks of the universe?
Not exactly. Timaeus actually suggests that these elements, as we experience them, are constantly changing and transforming into one another.
So they're not fixed and unchanging.
Right. He cautions against thinking of them as simply this or that, but rather as having the potential to become one another.
So it's more about their potential for transformation.
Exactly. And he goes on to connect these elements with specific geometric forms.
Oh, that's cool. I remember reading about that.
He associates the cube with earth because of its stability,
Okay.
the tetrahedron or pyramid with fire because of its sharp points and mobility.
Right. Fire is kind of like that?
Yeah, the octahedron with air
Mm-hmm.
and the icosahedron with water.
So he's giving a geometric interpretation of the elements.
Exactly. This is a very mathematical way of understanding the structure of the physical world.
Fascinating. And what about the world itself, the cosmos as a whole? How does Plato envision that?
Well, he describes the creation of the world as this kind of living being,
Okay.
this spherical self-contained entity.
Wow. So the universe itself is alive.
In a sense, yes, it lacks external sense organs or limbs because there's nothing outside of it.
Right. It's everything.
And its spherical shape and its circular motion are seen as the most appropriate for something that has mind and intelligence.
So there's this elegance and perfection to the design of the cosmos.
There is.
And I know that later in the Timaeus, Plato touches on the creation of the human body.
He does, but it's almost presented as a secondary consideration
Oh, really?
compared to the grand design of the cosmos.
So it's like the universe is the main event and humans are kind of a side project.
Well, he suggests that the human body is made by these superior powers as a vessel and nourishment for what he calls the inferior nature.
I see. So the body is like a vehicle for the soul.
Right. And he goes into some detail about the intricate systems within the body, the channels that distribute moisture, the role of fire and air in breathing. And he also talks about the origins of diseases, attributing them to imbalances and corruptions within the body.
So disease is a kind of disruption of the natural harmony.
Right. And interestingly, he also links diseases of the soul to bodily conditions and bad education.
That connects back to that idea we saw in the Republic that wrongdoing is often a result of ignorance rather than malice.
Exactly. It's this consistent thread running through Plato's work. Knowledge and understanding are key to living a virtuous life.
Right. Knowledge is power.
And now let's turn briefly to the Critias,
Okay.
which seems to be closely connected to the Timaeus, but shifts its focus more towards history and society.
All right. So how do they connect?
Well, the Critias is presented as a direct continuation of the Timaeus.
Okay.
It was meant to be the second part of a trilogy.
Ah, so they're part of a larger story.
They are. And in Critias, the character of Critias
Okay.
takes on the role of narrator.
Mm-hmm.
And he tells this ancient Athenian story that has been passed down through his family from the famous Athenian statesman Solon.
Interesting. So it's a story within a story.
Yeah, and the purpose of this story is to provide a kind of historical illustration of Socrates' desire to see his ideal state.
The one he describes in the Republic.
Exactly. He wants to see it in action,
Okay.
particularly in the context of conflict with other societies.
So he's looking for a real-world example of his ideal state.
Right, and the story that Critias tells, which he claims he got from Egyptian priests during Solon's travels,
Okay.
is about the ancient Athenians and their incredible resistance against this powerful empire called Atlantis.
Atlantis.
Yes, Atlantis was this advanced civilization located beyond the Pillars of Heracles.
Which we now know is the Straits of Gibraltar.
Right, and Critias emphasizes the immense size and wealth and military power of Atlantis.
Wow. So they were a force to be reckoned with.
They were, and they were trying to conquer vast territories in Europe and Asia.
So they had ambitions of world domination.
They did.
And what about the Athenians? How did they respond to this threat?
Well, despite being just one city-state among many, the Athenians bravely stood up to Atlantis.
That's courageous.
They led the Hellenic forces and ultimately defeated the Atlantean army, liberating the rest of the Mediterranean world.
Wow. So they were the heroes of the day.
They were.
David versus Goliath.
Exactly.
But I know that Atlantis doesn't just fade away. They have a pretty dramatic end.
They do. According to the story, Atlantis is ultimately destroyed by a series of massive earthquakes and floods.
Oh, wow.
The entire island sinks beneath the ocean in a single day and night.
That's intense.
It is, and this leaves behind impassable mud shoals that prevent any further navigation in that region.
So it's a lost civilization swallowed by the sea.
Exactly.
And within the story of Atlantis, there's also a description of ancient Attica,
Yeah.
the region around Athens. And how does that description compare to the ideal state outlined in the Republic?
Well, the Critias describes ancient Attica as this fertile and prosperous land with a well-organized society. And notably, it mentions a warrior class that lived communally sharing resources and dedicated to their military duties.
That sounds a lot like the Guardian class in the Republic.
It does. It's a very clear parallel.
Yeah.
And it also talks about their advanced infrastructure, things like canals used for irrigation and transportation.
So they were technologically advanced as well.
They were. So the story in Critias seems to offer this historical grounding for Plato's ideas.
I see.
It's like he's connecting the abstract concepts of the Republic to a legendary, maybe even idealized past.
So he's suggesting that a society similar to his idea state may have actually existed at some point?
In a way, yes.
That's a really intriguing connection.
And I think it's remarkable how these three dialogues interweave, exploring these fundamental questions of justice, the ideal society, the nature of the cosmos, and this blend of history and myth.
Yeah, it's really impressive how Plato weaves together these different threads of thought.
It is.
And I think what makes Plato so compelling even today is that these aren't just abstract ideas confined to ancient texts. His questions about justice, virtue knowledge, the relationship between the body and the soul, they still resonate with us deeply.
They do. They force us to think critically about how we organize our own societies and how we live our own individual lives.
Exactly. What does it mean to live a good life?
Right. What are the principles that should guide our actions, shape our institutions?
What is justice?
Yeah, these are questions that are as relevant today as they were in Plato's time.
For sure.
So as we bring this deep dive into Plato to a close, let's leave you, our listener, with a final thought to ponder.
Okay.
Consider Plato's emphasis on the importance of reason and order,
Okay.
not just in the structure of society, but also within the individual soul.
Right.
Even if we can't achieve this perfect ideal state or fully comprehend the cosmos, how might Plato's focus on reason and order offer us valuable guidance as we navigate the complexities of the modern world?
That's a great question to reflect on.
It is, and maybe reflecting on the inner republic of your own soul can help you understand how you interact with the world around you.
I like that.
And now, as our intellectual voyage comes to a close, remember that the quest for knowledge is a journey without end.
It is.
So keep exploring those vast and fascinating landscapes of thought with us here at the All Sorts Podcast.
Absolutely.
And if you found this deep dive enriching and you want to support our mission of bringing you more insightful discussions,
Yes.
please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to the All Sorts Podcast on YouTube.
And don't forget to check out our archive of past episodes.
Right?
There's a treasure trove of knowledge just waiting to be discovered.
There is.
And for those ongoing conversations and shared discoveries, connect with us, the All Sorts Podcast, on X, Instagram, and Threads.
Yeah, let's keep exploring together.
Let's do it.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.